3, 2, 1.
Welcome to another episode of the Politipop Podcast, the podcast where we take your favorite pop culture media and discuss the social and political themes within. Today, we are discussing Lord of the Rings and its depictions of masculinity. I am your co-host, Mike Booch, a.k.a. Samwise Ganja, a.k.a. Gandalf the Eye, a.k.a. Horny Boromir, a.k.a. Bay Omer, a.k.a. Not Idly Do These Leaves of Lorien Burn, a.k.a. Rest in Peace Ian Holm, the former actor of Bilbo Baggins. And with me is my amazing co-host, Ty. How you doing?
I'm doing well. This is Ty, a.k.a. Tybeard. I'm very excited to talk about Lord of the Rings.
Fantastic. And with us today, we have a special guest, the Warrior Wordsmith. Please welcome Frankie Soto. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm excited to be on. I'm excited to talk Lord of the Rings, masculinity, and hang out with you fellas.
Awesome. So welcome to the podcast, Frankie. Now, the reason we decided to invite you on today is because you are a poet, and we all know it, but more so, a lot of your work deals with masculinity. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about your work?
I don't want to say a lot. I mean, a lot of my recent book, which I just finished writing, my poetry manuscript, Boneyard, it focuses a little bit more on masculinity and understanding it growing up in a Latino household. And this specific one, I wanted to be a little more honest on some of the struggles and hurdles that boys and men have to take to feel like men, and some of the macho and machismo values that exist in the Hispanic culture, and I mean, other race cultures as well, but specifically I wanted to speak on my experience with it.
That's awesome, and we're planning on hearing a little bit from you today with one or two of your poems, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. But we'll get to that organically, and we'll just start talking about Lord of the Rings. I know we have our resident Lord of the Rings expert with us today. Ty, you are an absolute professional Lord of the Rings connoisseur, in my opinion, so can't wait to talk it out with you and have you correct me on all the names, like we had with Pope correcting us on the Halo lore last time.
Absolutely.
But I just do want to put a disclaimer. I am aware that there's a lot of problematic stuff surrounding Lord of the Rings, surrounding Tolkien and maybe his personal politics, which we can get into at some point. But we are aware. We're putting it out there now. We are aware that this is a very, very white film series. We're going over the original trilogy, and the only people of color we see in the movie happen to be the villains.
Yeah.
So we're just going to put that out there right now, and we're not going to ignore it, but our focus is going to be on how masculinity is depicted and how we relate to it in our lives. We're going to be sharing a lot of personal stuff, so it's going to get real. So before we begin, Ty, give them the plot, starting with Fellowship of the Ring.
All right. Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. A meek hobbit from the Shire and 8 companions set out on a journey to destroy the powerful One Ring and save Middle-earth from the Dark Lord Sauron.
All right, that's nice and simple. I like it. So, at the beginning, when they're talking about what each race represents when they get given the rings, I thought it was interesting how like the dwarves, they were craftsmen and miners, and in real life we kind of have our own version of that. Like, we believe that a true man is like a man who works with his hands. They also talk about humankind, but when they do, they just say men. They say like, oh, the world of men, the race of men, and how they desire power and how they're greedy. And I'd say that out of all of them, the elves are probably the most stereotypically feminine of them. Like, they're the prettiest race. They all have, like, all the men even, they have long hair. All of their swords and weapons are like with this this curvature and everything. Like, everything about the elves seems to be very soft and maybe even androgynous, yet they still have these incredibly badass warriors that do what they have to do when it's time to get work done, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they're some of the the most skilled warriors in the Lord of the Rings universe. You know, I mean, they're the ones that turned the tide of battle against Sauron, as you see in that war in the very beginning. You know, without the elves, they never would have stopped him. You know, the elven warriors are very, very skilled. But yeah, like you said, you know, they are kind of feminine. They're, you know, very well kept, very graceful, especially when compared to the dwarves and the humans.
And the story itself is all about jewelry. So from there, we're kind of
capitalism. I don't know.
That too. I had to go visit the Lord of the Rings earlier today while we got Dee's wedding band situation taken care of. But it is interesting that, like, you have a lot of medieval fantasy stories that are based around, like, oh, you know, obviously there's a dark lord in this story and everything, or like you can compare it to Game of Thrones, which obviously took a lot from the Lord of the Rings lore, but something like Game of Thrones, which I think is an apt comparison to make, is all about, like, you know, you have a lot of men who are, like, drinking, killing, having sex with a bunch of women. There's also a lot of problematic stuff in that too. There's a good amount of sexual assault for some reason. But you don't really see that here. The whole thing is about a piece of jewelry and walking to throw it into a volcano.
Yeah, when you really boil it down to it. I mean, Tolkien was very, very religious. He was, I believe, Catholic. So I don't think he would have put anything like that, you know, unsavory in that. But he was inspired to make the Lord of the Rings based on his experience serving in World War I. You know, he fought in the trenches, and a lot of close friends of his died. And he had a very personal, you know, a love story, basically. There was a woman that he was not supposed to be with because she was several years older, and his family, you know, forbade him from seeing her, et cetera, and he was fighting to get back to her. So that inspired him to write the Lord of the Rings. So, you know, it's this very high fantasy, you know, epic, you know, about a group of people trying to save the world. And there's, you know, elements of war and things like that. But I don't think he's someone that would have want to put, you know, rape or anything like extremely violent in there. It was not, you know, something that he would have been interested in portraying.
And good on him for that, except for the fact that he wasn't interested in portraying people of color. But I didn't know that he put himself into that many of the characters. I thought we were really just supposed to see his lens as from the Hobbit's point of view. But clearly, like you mentioned, with his relationship with this woman, that's very much Aragorn and Arwen.
Oh, very much so. And the inspiration for Aragorn and Arwen were other characters he wrote, Beren and Luthien, which I believe Aragorn sings about in Fellowship. Another, like, forbidden romance, and like that was very much his story of, you know, wanting to get back to the person he loves, and you know, the parents forbidding them and not supposed to be together. So yeah, he put a lot of himself into a lot of these characters.
Frankie, did you have anything you wanted to throw in there or no?
Not specifically. I mean, I agree with a lot of things you're talking about with the elves from me watching it. It's funny that you brought religion into it, because growing up a devout Catholic, the first thing I immediately thought when I saw the elves was the representation of Catholicism and the image that we were taught that Jesus would represent. The elves kind of gave that spiritual appearance of what we saw when we walked into the Catholic Church, of this holier image, this glowing hair, they just gave off a feel of religion, and that's the first thought when I was watching Lord of the Rings, not as a fan, and just kind of watching it to study it and kind of like look for the masculinity tones in it, and that's the first thing that came to my mind when I saw the elves.
Wow, I didn't even think of that, but that's such a good point. Yeah. Like, you do see that Jesus symbol, you know, the whitewashed Jesus. We all know that Jesus was a brown man, but like, yeah, like he has the, you know, the fair hair and the fair skin, and it's long, and you have your beards, and we do see that represented in a lot of the men in this story as well too. I say that like there's more than 3 women characters, but a lot of the men, like Aragorn fits that Jesus archetype with his beard and his long hair, and pretty much every other man in the story who's not a hobbit too, or an elf. Yeah,
I mean, you mentioned there not being a lot of female characters. I think also that, you know, serving in World War I, women were not allowed to serve in the military, you know, so I think a lot of his personal experience caused bias when he was writing this, and like he wrote what he knew, and so that's why I think he portrayed the world a certain way. He's from England, with a deep history of imperialism and colonialism, and I mean he definitely had a lot to say about these things. So I don't even know if he was in their favor, but definitely did not put a lot of diversity in the books for whatever reason, whether it's because he didn't think he should or he didn't want to. I don't know.
So just starting at the beginning, they had this quote in a narration about how hobbits will shape the fortunes of all, and we talk about the Shire and how, like, they're very simple folk. They're not supposed to be warriors. They're farmers. They're content with ignoring others and being ignored. And Bilbo, is it Bilbo who's narrating at the beginning? Who says, like, it's no bad thing to celebrate a simple life?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really thought that was that was interesting, that some of the heroes of this story are made out to be kind of the least stereotypically manly or masculine, the least masculine of all of the races. You have these soft face, stout hobbits who are just all about, eating, drinking, and farming.
Yeah, they're very childlike, they don't typically...
Personally, I don't believe it's bad thing to celebrate that kind of life.
No, not at all. But like, they're very childlike. They don't typically go out and experience the world. But the Hobbit film had not been made at this time, but obviously the Hobbit book came out first, and they do allude to certain events from that. So we know that Gandalf the Wizard has come before, and he's recruited Bilbo on this journey that no other Hobbit has ever taken, and it's been the talk of the Shire for years and years and years. Now we're going to see hobbits play an even larger role in the world around them than Bilbo did previously.
So speaking of Gandalf, I want to move into his introduction into the film. They do allude to the Hobbit and his whole journey that takes place before the Lord of the Rings story. But we have him coming into the Shire to celebrate Bilbo's 111th birthday, or his 111st birthday, if you want to call it that. And we see just from the get-go this camaraderie between him and Frodo, how, like, they're kind of busting each other's chops a little bit, which, that's something that, that men do in real life a lot. We kind of, diss each other, but we know for the most part it comes from a good place. But, but Frodo jumps on Gandalf and hugs him. And that's kind of the first instance of this man-on-man affection that we see, and there's a lot of it throughout this trilogy. And we see not just the hobbits doing it, but there are a lot of warriors who are very physical with each other in a completely platonic way.
Yeah, I mean, you see this with almost, I'd say, every protagonist in the movies. Every character has a moment of embrace, whether it's Aragorn, Gandalf, whoever it might be. You definitely see a lot of that, and some very, very close friendships.
Now, Frankie, I know you mentioned before that your poetry, some of it talks about how, being a man and growing up in a Latino household and having to subscribe to a certain ideal of masculinity. I come from a similar background, except it was just myself and my father, but him being also a Latino man, they have certain expectations. The way that these men interact with each other physically, is that something that would have been encouraged in your household growing up?
You know what? I actually want to say, yeah. I mean, I never had... My father and I stopped speaking when I was a teenager, but my father, I want to say he was a hugger, even if he couldn't show his affection as freely as I feel like I, consider myself someone who shares it now. But Hispanics show love through body, and we even talk with our hands. So I think hugs were acceptable growing up in my house.
Yeah, the way that I grew up, like, we had hugs and we had kisses on the cheek. Like, my father was very much about that. I know that, like, there's kind of a lot of jokes going around that, like, white families are the ones that kiss on the mouths and stuff like that. But, like, even when he and I would kiss on the cheek, if it was like a little too long, or if it was like quick and you accidentally caught like the edge of the mouth, he would get so weird about it. There's going to be a whole podcast full of daddy issues, by the way, just putting that out front. The Daddy Issues Trio, the name of our progressive punk band.
Ooh, I like it.
But yeah, right. but yeah, like, he was very homophobic. just he was the one who taught me or introduced me to the idea of what gay people were, and it was a very ass backwards idea of it. And so that really wasn't encouraged in my household. If we were laying in the same bed together, I mean, we had a studio apartment, I'm the son, he's the father, like, we would sleep in the same bed, but like if I wanted to be warm, I would put my back up against his, and he was not about it. He'd be like, oh, don't put your butt on mine, don't touch me. Like, he was very much against it. What about you, Ty? Now, I know that you don't necessarily come from the same sort of cultural background that Frankie and I do, but what was affection like in your house growing up?
I mean, as a kid, I remember, obviously my mom being affectionate and stuff like that. But, my dad, so he was very homophobic as a child. When I was a child, he would say a lot of problematic things about anyone in that community, and he would point out people on TV like, oh look, he's gay too, and stuff like that. Like, he would make a lot of comments. Wow. And then when I was I want to say 10 or 11, my father came out as gay. So it was very, very,
dun, dun,
yeah, it was very shocking, especially having known him to be so homophobic. And I realized then that years later, the more I thought about it, I realized that, he was trying to cover, he was trying to keep himself being that tough guy, that masculine guy, because, his father was a very, very, tough, hands-on kind of man. Now, my grandfather was very affectionate. I remember rolling on the grass with him, sitting on his lap watching TV. But he was also a man who worked with his hands a lot, and I don't think he would have accepted a gay son. And I think that's why my dad probably waited so long to come out. And it definitely raised the tension, between him and his father, and between my mom and his father. They basically blame my mom for my dad coming out as gay. So there was a lot of issues there. And it was a lot for me to get through, my brother is also gay. So there, having both of them come out, there always was this weird feeling, in the back of my mind, am I gay too? The two men that, I grew up around, my brother and my father both coming out, there was always that weird feeling in the back of my head, am I sure? Am I sure I'm not? But, I'm not, and it's something that I had to explore and realize, and come to terms with, that, I am comfortable with who I am, and I'm not gay, and that's okay, but it was definitely interesting knowing how my father had acted for so many years, and then, getting that reveal when he finally felt comfortable coming out. So yeah, it's kind of strange. And my dad's very affectionate now. Like, when I see him, he always wants to give you a kiss and a hug. And in some ways, he's actually more affectionate than my mom. My mom's not as much of a hugger and kisser these days. So it's really turned things around. And it's kind of interesting to look at that and see.
Well, yeah, I just want to skip ahead a little bit. I noticed that, the big reason I chose this movie is because, a good majority of the men in this movie, the main characters who are meant to be the heroes, they don't really do a lot of yelling often. They don't do a lot of, yelling at each other, but it does happen. And I noticed that when they're trying to get into the minds of Moria and, is it Merry or Pippin? I always get them confused. Merry is he gets yelled at by Gandalf, right?
Usually it's Pippin. But they tend to both get that. But Pippin's the one that knocks down the skeleton down the well. He's the one that's always getting in a little bit more trouble.
Yeah, so Gandalf is yelling at him when he can't get in through the door, and I saw that, and I'm thinking, we do see a lot of people lash out with anger when they have their own insecurities. You said your father, he would say a lot of really problematic and homophobic things. And that probably stemmed, I'm no psychologist, but that probably stemmed from him not being able to be himself. And that's where that insecurity came from. Gandalf's insecurity came from him not being able to get in. Meanwhile, he said he used to know all of the spells and all of these different languages, right?
Yeah. So I think another frustration, too, is Gandalf is not the highest wizard in Middle-earth. It's Saruman the White, who Gandalf goes to for aid. And it turns out that Saruman has turned his back on the people of Middle-earth and joined forces with Sauron. and he actually imprisons Gandalf for quite some time. And, you know, Gandalf's the one trying to get Frodo and the ring to Mordor. He's basically the leader of this group, of this Fellowship of Nine, and to oppose the Nine Ring-Wraiths. And I think, you know, at every turn, Saruman just bests him. You know, they're trying to go over the mountain, and Saruman casts his magic, and he causes, you know, an avalanche. And Gandalf, as powerful as he is, he can't get them through it. You know, and they wound up having to turn to the Mines of Moria, and I think he's just frustrated, you know, that he can't even get them inside there. It's probably this very powerless feeling, you know, when he knows there's this other wizard out there who's so much better than him, that's so much wiser and knows so much more, or at least it seems that way to him.
And as we know, both in fantasy and real life, men cannot stand getting lost.
Nope.
So that was another big part. The whole time Gimli's in his ear, we go through the Mines of Moria, we can go through the Mines of Moria. And Gandalf's like, shut up, we're not going through the Mines of Moria. But a little bit back before that, we see at Bilbo's birthday party that he starts giving Frodo all of this emotion. He's letting it out. You know, he's like, oh, well, you know, I took you in because, you know, I thought you were different and all this other stuff. And he's just letting out all of these feelings. And Frodo asks him, he's like, are you drunk? I mean, he doesn't say that verbatim, but he questions Bilbo's sobriety. Like, and I think we do find that it's common for men to be more expressive with each other and be like, I love you, bro, and hug you when we're drunk, because I think we're just raised in this society to be repressed that way.
Yep, definitely.
Frankie, are you more emotional when you're drunk?
It's my turn.
Oh, sorry. I cut off
now.
Ty to ask you a question. I'm the worst host.
Oh man, I have a lot going back to some of the stuff that Ty was talking about when it came to his father and his brother, and then we went into Gandalf and Gandalf and the White Wizard. I could definitely see an analogy between Ty's father and Ty's father and Ty's grandfather. If their relationship was difficult to talk about, you know, being a homosexual openly and freely, and Gandalf with the wizard, knowing that there's someone who is wiser than you, who does know more than you, but he still kind of wants to reach that level. It's kind of like as if Ty's father still wanted that approval and had internal conflict with himself, because the person you look up to is supposed to be wiser and is supposed to be more powerful, and you still seek that approval, even if that person is sort of your opposition, to getting to your happiness. And I'm sure that Ty's father's level of happiness was being able to finally be open about being homosexual and defeating that war inside of him. And as Gandalf wanted to one day be more powerful than the wizard and, you know, get the ring there. So I had a quick question for Ty. Do you think your father coming out played a role in your brother feeling more secure in talking about it?
You know, it's a weird thing. My father used my brother as the reason for him coming out. So I actually think it made my brother hesitate to come out longer. Because it damaged my mom a lot. You know, it really hurt her, obviously. Having, you know, been with someone who probably, you know, was never really truly attracted to her, or, you know, wasn't in love with her. And, you know, it caused a lot of friction in our family. So my brother waited a very long time. I remember, you know, growing up, a lot of people would be like, oh, your brother's gay. And I'm like, no, he's not. You know, I was always very like, no, don't, you know, that's not true. Because I think I was also in denial because of my dad using him as the reason for coming out. So I think it actually made it more difficult in that regard, you know, for my brother to finally do it. I don't know who the first person he told was. I know he told me before he told my mom. I don't think he told my dad before me either, to be honest.
Do you mind if I speak just to my experiences growing up in your household?
No, go ahead.
And you know, you can tell me to shut the fuck up, because obviously it's your family or whatever if you want me to edit it out, but
your family too.
Yeah, I just know that, like, I came into your life as your friend when, you know, your brother was what, 8 years old? Mm-hmm. You know, maybe a little younger, maybe a little older, but I feel like up until that point in your life, the only gay person you'd ever known was your father. And he wasn't the best guy.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because of his gayness, but I feel like, do you think you equated a lot of negative attributes to being gay?
Yeah, I mean, it damaged me a lot, you know, like you said, we never had a really healthy relationship to begin with. And then, you know, when he came out, he kind of, you know, in so many words, abandoned my family, you know, to go kind of like discover, you know, himself and find his happiness. So I think definitely, you know, that being my personal experience, you know, made me have a certain feeling about gay people. And, you know, that was the first thing I thought about, definitely.
Yeah, and I just remember that there was a lot of problematic stuff being thrown around in that household. And it wasn't necessarily at gay people, I think, but I think it was more at your father. And the biggest thing to make fun of him about was the fact that he was gay. And I'm sure that your brother growing up in that household was like, well, I'm just going to keep this to myself.
Yeah.
Because this is how they think about gay people. But it was more so, I think, how you guys thought about your father, whom after I, like, met in person, I was like, I get it. You know? But yeah, I remember when you told me that your brother had come out, I was like, yeah. Like, I'd stopped talking about it a while ago because I knew it was a touchy subject for you, but I wasn't really caught off guard by that. I was like, all right, like, he's still the same kid, but, you know, I'm not necessarily surprised.
Yeah, I think it was more of like having people define him, you know, the way my dad did. That was the reason, like, I didn't want people to be like, to tell me that, you know. I was like, if he is, and he'll come out on his own. Like, you don't need to rub it in his face or my face and be like, he's gay, you know. So that was like, I remember growing up, that was like a big thing that really bothered me. So I would always, you know, shut people down with that.
And plus, we were teenagers, and teenagers aren't really the most mature people in the world. I remember a lot of our friends, when they came over, they would use it as if it was an insult. They would be like, oh, your brother's this, your brother's that. And it wouldn't come out as a sincere, like, oh, you know, your brother's gay. Like, it would always come out as a punchline or something. And I think that right there, obviously you're going to respond negatively to
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah. It was never, you know, never a good conversation or a comforting conversation. It was always, you know, a joke or ridiculing. So, you know, and it always made me feel bad, and I'm sure it made him feel bad too.
Oh yeah. I just, I mean, that has to be an insanely tough predicament to be in, because you're at a young age coming into your own, like, this is your introduction to homosexuality, and at the same time you're being introduced to homosexuality with your father, and at the same time you're being broken because it's separating a family element that you had. So you're kind of healing and embracing something at the same time. I can't even imagine the conflict that it had to cause on you watching your family break apart because your father is now coming out with this, and you're trying to heal at the same time and understand homosexuality. And then your brother's predicament is, how do I jump into this rope, and how do I share my honesty when he's already seen something be so difficult and kind of, you know, just break apart. That has to be tough for everyone in the family.
Yeah, definitely. You know, and it stems from, I think you said earlier, like, my father wanted to be happy. And, like, I get that, you know, people want to be happy. Unfortunately, a lot of people got hurt in the process, you know, and I want my brother to be happy. And luckily, you know, I don't think he took the same steps my father did. You know, he came out much sooner, and you know, he didn't get into, like, a relationship with a woman and get married and things like that. So, you know, I think it did work out. But yeah, it was, you know, definitely it's hard to process all that and to learn about, you know, we were kids of the 90s. So, you know, I feel like, you know, homosexuality wasn't really something that was openly talked about or, you know, learned about for a long time. So it really, like,
it was more taboo than normal.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Was there a
know?
Pride Month? Like, were we wearing it?
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, it wasn't something that I really cared to learn about. I have to be honest. You know, it wasn't until I was an adult that I really started to, like, educate myself more about it. And I'm still learning about it. You know what I mean? Like, it's still something that I learn about and have to really pay attention to, you know, what I'm saying and how I'm thinking and things like that. And, you know, that's something that I'm working on.
And that's really a reckoning that we kind of all go through, whether it's our own internalized misogyny, our internalized homophobia, or whatever it is. Like, every step of the way, we can still consider ourselves allies while having to reconcile with the fact that we may not be perfect or inclusive individuals, but as long as we're aware it's there and we're working on it actively, that's what's really important.
Yeah, I agree. And, another little interesting part about my family, my mom remarried, and my stepfather was very much like the macho kind of man who, was into sports and
works with his
hands, and, he's a tough guy. And I think it was hard for him to wrap his head around. And I remember, I'm kind of into sports. Like, I like football, I like baseball, but I'm not like, I was never an athlete. I was kind of more of a nerd. I was really into, Lord of the Rings and video games and stuff. And I think, that was
that's why we're here.
That was disappointing for him. And then my brother really disappointed him because he would always be like, oh, why is he playing with Webkins? Get him a football, like that was really hard for him to wrap his head around. So there was a lot of tension for a lot of years there. Us growing up, I think I was 16 when he moved in, and my brother was 11. So, that definitely was tough. But I remember when my brother came out, surprisingly, my stepdad was very like, okay, like he was cool with it. He actually was the one that kind of talked to my mom and was like, we have to accept this. So I don't know what changed in the years, because my brother came out when he was already, I think, 21 or 22. So, but that was definitely surprising to see him kind of flip a little bit on that.
Yeah, it's easy to condemn something until you find out somebody you love is a part of that thing.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh wow, there are people
Yep.
But let's just piggyback off of that. I want to talk about casting because, as we know, Gandalf is played by the incredible Sir Ian McKellen, right?
Yeah.
Now, Ian McKellen is out in real life as well. He's an incredible actor, but he's also gay. And I found it interesting how he is not just one of the main heroes, but probably, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the most powerful hero in this group. It didn't really hit me until I was watching the beginning of Two Towers when they go into the end of his fight with the Balrog. But this dude is falling from the bridge, grabs his sword, and is still giving the Balrog the business. All right, they're on this mountain peak, and he's getting lightning from the sky and stabbing this bat. He's going at it with this Balrog. And, typically we're told that gay men aren't masculine, that they can't be tough, which we obviously know this isn't true. But we see an example of this in Lord of the Rings. Obviously, Gandalf isn't depicted as gay or anything like that. He's a celestial being as far as I'm concerned, so he probably is an ace. But, it is awesome to just see a gay actor depicted in such a badass way that we don't normally see, or we didn't normally see back in 2001.
Honestly. Yeah, I mean, Gandalf is, like you said, he's one of the most powerful beings in the universe. It turns out he is actually more powerful than Saruman. He is, I never knew how to pronounce it, the Mire. They're almost like a demigod. And, when they come to Middle-earth, they choose a form. So the Balrog is also a Mire. So, he's basically as powerful as the Balrog. And he is very much a Jesus figure. He dies, he resurrects. So there's a lot of religious imagery there. So it's even more interesting to see them choose an openly gay man to be more or less Jesus Christ in the Lord of the Rings.
And we also had this moment where Gandalf, which for the most part, he is another soft-spoken individual, we had this moment in the Fellowship where he's yelling at Bilbo because he's telling Bilbo, yo, you got to let that ring go. And Bilbo is like, oh, you want to take it from me and everything else. And Gandalf just isn't having it anymore. He starts, throwing some of that magic at him and everything. And we see that Bilbo kind of backs up, realizes that he's being called out, and responds to Gandalf with a hug. I'm one of those people who's been called out a lot of times. I deal with it a lot better now than I used to. Frankie, I wanted to ask you, do you have any moments in your life where, you might have had problematic views you were called out on, and how did you handle them? Were you more like a Bilbo and you were like, all right, I'm wrong, after you finally get, yelled at by a tall wizard man? Or, were you more...
You mean when someone had a problem with me and lashed out like that?
Yeah, like because Bilbo's kind of being called out by Gandalf over this ring.
Yeah, I remember the
thing.
scene.
Yeah, so how do you normally respond when you're called out on something that's problematic that you may have, or a toxic trait that you may have?
Well, listen, I have deep-rooted daddy issues, and my father was I'm 5'8" on a good day. My father's 6'1", 250, muscular, very macho, very confident man. So I have two ways of approaching it. I can be very empathetic and apologetic and want to discuss what's going on to resolve the problem. Or if you come off very like old school masculine and attack mode, I go very into like defensive. Let's put our hands up. I want to snuff you. I want to fight. So those are the two ways that I go. But I'm more so in my normal life an empath. I want to talk things out. I'm very big on an apology being one of the strongest traits a man can have.
Mm-hmm.
It can resolve so much. And I remember that scene so vividly when Gandalf, because you saw when Gandalf got serious, it had a very like father and son feel to it. The way Bilbo just cowered down, and you saw how like Gandalf was like controlling like the world. Like he became this like outer worldly presence, and like Bilbo just surrendered. Like he knew right away, and it reminded me of my father when his tone would reach a certain place and my legs would start to shake and I would just lose my sense of self and just follow, command, obey. And it was just very obedient and very structured and very robotic and very idea of masculine. And it's one of the things personally as a father now that when I hear my voice reach those levels, I have to like speak to myself and say, listen, we got to approach this a different way. We got to go back in the room. We got to go talk to my daughter again. When I get like that with my son, we got to go back. We got to give him a kiss. We got to talk softer. And I have to literally check myself because I know what it was like to feel like Bilbo there, or like Pippin when the skeleton fell. There was real fear of, and men seem to fear that kind of interaction. And we shouldn't, because then it goes into what I told you is my other mode.
Hands up.
Where I want to fight. Hands up.
What about you, Ty? I mean, I know the answer, but just for the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I think we've kind of discussed in the podcast a little previously. You know, my viewpoints have changed a lot, and I think, back when I was younger, especially my teenage years, I was very openly defiant. Like, I didn't want to listen to that. If you tried to tell me I was wrong, I would debate the hell out of you. And, I would do
maybe even personally attack the person.
Oh yeah, I could get real vicious. I would use personal stuff against you. But I think, over the last, 5-6 years or so, I think I've really come to respect people's opinions more, to be able to talk it out more. I've admitted when I'm wrong. I've apologized for viewpoints I've had and things I've said. My girlfriend's taught me a lot. Being Hispanic and a woman, she's just taught me a lot of stuff that I believe was problematic and things that I had done that were problematic. So it definitely has taught me a lot, and I'm able to take that much better, I think, today. And I'm more willing to say, oh, okay, I didn't know that, I didn't understand that. Explain it to me. Like, I want to know more. A lot of times, like I'll ask questions. I'll look it up myself. Like, I want to know what the actual answer is instead of just what I always believed.
I wish so many people had your mindset with everything going on right now with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I wish so too.
I've been waiting for so many people just to be like, all right, I want to learn. Explain it to me.
I think it's because we connect our beliefs and our actions to our identity so much that when our actions or our beliefs are attacked or met with some sort of opposition, we see it as we're being attacked.
Oh yeah.
And I know that I've been guilty of that in the past, and sometimes I still am now, but now I'm a lot more reflective about it. My father, he would always tell me, it takes a true man to say he's sorry and mean it. That being said, he never apologized for anything. Like, he would find every way around apologizing, a way to turn whatever you said back around on you. He'll pull the whole, like, oh, you didn't like what I said? I guess I just won't say anything anymore. Like, I guess I just won't do that, blah, blah, blah. And, there was one time, like, I called him out on something, back when I was still talking to the son of a bitch. And he said, like, oh, like, so I made some mistakes. What should I do? Should I shoot myself in the head? Is that what I should do? My response was, if you want. When you're an adult, you can fucking talk to your dad however you want. But like, I found myself not long after I was in an argument with my then girlfriend, now fiance, and she, was upset at something I said or did. And I was like, oh, should I just shoot myself? And I stopped. And I'm like, fuck, I'm being my father right now. And as far as I've come in my growth as a man, I still catch myself. It's so hard to deprogram what we're brought up with.
That's progress, though. That catch right there, that's progress.
It's something. Just for the sake of this retrospective, I decided to view The Ring as toxic masculinity. I know that's not what it was made to represent, but just for this specifically, I think there's a lot of correlations that you have, people who hold it and they just kind of hold on to it. And once in a while, they're a little problematic. Like, Bilbo. Bilbo wasn't really worse for having the ring, but once he was called out on it, or once the ring was passed on to Frodo, he was very upset about that. But then you have characters like Gollum, Smeagol, who that has ruined his life. The ring has ruined his life, and if you want to view it as toxic masculinity, that identity is now a part of him. He has come too far. But in seeing how it's affected Bilbo and how it's affected Gollum, Frodo has been able to see, this is what I could become.
Definitely.
And I think that we all come from places of that, of, seeing the men in our lives, the men who have raised us, or mostly raised us, until we stopped talking to them or they walked out, and then came back later. But, in seeing that, I think it's easy to see what we could become. And because we have that reference point, we're kind of in a better place for it, for being like, all right, I know what not to be.
Yeah, I think if you're going to view The Ring that way, you can see that especially in the relationship between Boromir and Faramir and who they are as people. Boromir is very much like, the manly man. He's like the captain of Gondor. He's, the hero, his father's favorite son, the eldest, the one who, needs to bring hope to his people. And the ring just manipulates him into, he says, it's a weapon, we should use it. He gets very violent with it, as opposed to his younger brother Faramir, who's always been much more soft-spoken, more gentle. He kills an enemy in his first appearance, and he
this was so good.
It really was, yes. He reflects on it. He says, because I thought this quote was great, I think Frodo or Sam calls him the enemy, and he says, the enemy, his sense of duty was no less than yours, I deem. You wonder what his name is, where he came from, if he really was evil at heart. What lies or threats led him on this long march from home? He would rather have stayed there, in peace. War will make corpses of us all. And I think that's a lot of how he feels. He doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to be the captain of Gondor. He would rather be at home. He wants the approval of his father. And I think him and Boromir's reactions to the ring and how they're able to act towards Frodo really points at toxic masculinity. Faramir is much more gentle with Frodo and is able to let him go, where Boromir will not. He tries to take that ring from him.
Yeah, and I saw that Faramir, in my opinion, it seemed like he only let Frodo and Sam go once he learned of what the ring did to his brother, and that it was his downfall. And he was like, oh, like, I don't want to be that guy. Yeah,
even though he had always kind of looked up to his brother. That was definitely interesting. His brother had always been his hero. And then when he saw that had happened, he decided to act differently and give them a chance.
Well, they're both victims of the sins of the father, you know? Their father's a fucking asshole, and he pits them against each other and has his idea of what a true man should be, what a true king should be, what a warrior should be. And every step of the way, he's cutting down Faramir, telling him that he'll never amount to that. And, you know, this is a little further on in the Two Towers, but you know, this is something I've experienced in my life too, that I spent a good portion of my life trying to gain my father's respect and approval. And then I realized I don't respect this man in the first place. Why do I care what he thinks about me?
Yeah, I mean, that's important. That's important to know, you know. Respect is, it goes both ways.
I mean, isn't that exactly, in hindsight, what we see now as men, the role that men play for younger men? You think about Frodo. Would he have been the man that he was without Bilbo, without that relationship with Gandalf, without that openly relationship to hug and talk and feel that open? If Boromir had a relationship similar to Frodo and Bilbo, would he have been different? Would his views have been different? So I think that just also, it kind of puts more of an emphasis on the power that we as men have now to change the idea of masculinity, you know, and to change the way younger men and boys grow up to be. I think it just shows that we have so much more power than we realize.
That is beautifully put. I'm just going to continue going through my notes, and we don't have to, you know, I'm going to gloss over, because we had this party. Question, is drinking manly? If so, the hobbits are manly as fuck. Is Rosie ever going to stop cleaning that mug? Now, we see her first, she's cleaning a mug, and then when they leave the pub, she's cleaning a mug again. She's working hard, that Rosie. I think it's interesting that Sam's interested, but he doesn't really have the courage to ask her out. And even when he sees other guys making a move for her, he's like, oh, well, you know, that stinks. Oh, what does he say? Watch who you're hitting on, or watch who you're...
Yeah, something along those lines.
Something along those lines. And I love how Frodo steps in here, because before Frodo was like, oh, are you going to ask her to dance? Like, it seemed like he was kind of encouraging Sam to, you know, to hit on Rosie or whatever. But then at the end, he's like, don't worry, man. She knows an idiot when she sees one. Like, we see multiple times in these movies that a lot of these men are just building each other up, and instead of cutting each other down. And it is a beautiful thing to see.
Definitely.
I did also like how the growth of these characters only began when they stepped out of their comfort zone. Like, Sam stops and he says, if I take one more step, it's the furthest I'll ever be from the Shire. I'm paraphrasing.
From home. He says from home.
Frodo says,
you know?
From home. And what does Frodo say to him in response to that again? Do you remember, Ty?
I thought it was just like a generic, like, oh, Sam. But, like, come on,
it's mostly
Sam.
what he says in the movie. Sam,
He's just always like Sam.
buddy.
He's always building Sam back up. He's always trying to give him courage. He calls him Samwise the Brave. You know, Frodo never would have gotten that far without Samwise the Brave. I'm glad you're with me, Sam. You know, like he always gives him words of encouragement, because, you know, Sam has very low self-esteem, even though, you know, he's one of the most like brave and reliable and loyal friends that you could ever see. You know.
Oh yeah, he's by far one of my favorite characters. When he jumped into the water to chase Frodo because he refused to let him go by himself, man, I was like, I need friends like that in my life. He doesn't know how to swim, and he was still gonna sacrifice himself because that's how much he wanted to go along with Frodo, to be there for him. And once I saw that, I was like, man, Sam, I'm down with you.
Yeah, and we see that a lot with the hobbits in general too. Like, when they're all taking on that troll, and, you know, Merry and Pippin are up there throwing stones and everything, and once they finally think that Frodo's been killed by that troll, they lose their shit. And these hobbits, who have no chance of standing up against a cave troll, they start going to town on this guy. They jump on him, they're stabbing him and everything. Like, I love how they really back each other up. Or even in the beginning of the Two Towers, when the Uruk-hai are being dicks to which hobbit again?
Well, Merry's the one that's been injured, and Pippin's the one that's like, oh, leave him alone.
They're being dicks to Merry. And yeah, Pippin, who once again, like, if he speaks up, who knows, they could decapitate him. Like, but he still takes that risk to back up his friend. Like, these are soft-spoken people. These are soft people, if I can say that, the hobbits. But they as Bilbo says, that things made in the Shire are meant to endure, and it seems that way with the people who come from the Shire too, and that's really beautiful.
Yeah, and I think like you see some interesting things when they have the Council of Elrond for the ring, and they're trying to figure out what to do with it and who's going to take it, and you see the elves and the dwarves fighting, and Boromir and the men want to take the ring, and Gandalf starts speaking the language of Mordor, and it seems like anarchy, and it's Frodo who steps up and says, "I'll take the ring, I'll take it to Mordor," and like he's again he's like this young childlike creature who's he's not a warrior, he's not this great hero, but he's willing to put his life on the line and travel all the way to Mordor.
Yeah, I think it's because he has the least ego out of all of them. Like he poses the least danger if he gets overtaken by the ring as well. I feel like because he's so small, because he's so childlike, like he can endure it. Like everyone else can become so much more powerful and stuck on their ego that it can endanger everyone. So I feel like that's what made him so perfect. He was soft, but soft doesn't imply weak, and I think that shows the hobbits.
Yeah, I mean Gandalf wouldn't even touch the ring, right? He's like, don't give it to me. You hold on to it. Like I don't want anything to do with this thing.
Yeah, and that's Gandalf, like the toughest dude there is, power-wise and everything. And I think that just talking about humility being such a good quality to have, we can segue into Aragorn here, because Aragorn is unlike any other protagonist that we see in action movies. And rewatching these things, they're action movies.
Yeah.
Like there's actually not a lot of downtime in between. There's a lot of fighting that happens, but when we meet Aragorn, we see that he is so soft spoken. I didn't notice it until the last time I watched this movie with you, Ty, last year, and that's when I was like, we should do a podcast about this. But like Aragorn has he's like, "Hello, my name is Aragorn," like that. Like that's how he talks pretty much the whole time. He's
always whispering. I mean, his whole thing is he's trying to stay hidden. He doesn't want a lot of attention. He even says to Frodo, he's like, "Oh, I can remain hidden from sight, but not disappear entirely." He's always trying to just stay out of the spotlight.
But isn't he trying to hide from the shadow of his family, like the history of his family?
He's another one.
It makes sense why he doesn't want to be seen.
He is.
I always call him the poet of the movie, but that's just.
Yeah, I mean he has a lot of family history that he is not proud of. He comes from a long line of a bloodline of men that live longer than other men. They're ancient kings. His ancestor actually stopped Sauron the first time, cut him down, but he kept the ring for himself. He wouldn't destroy it. And ever since then, it's like the men of the world have been cursed. They had that one chance to end evil and they didn't do it, and it showed how corrupt they were. And I think, he's always afraid of falling into that trap, much like, we've talked about not wanting to be like our fathers. He doesn't want to be like his ancestors. He doesn't want to be that weak man that gives in to greed and power.
I think you see that. I forget the scene when the woman asks how old he was. You saw how uncomfortable he got because he had to let him know how old he was, and then you knew that he was given a longevity of life, and you could see how uncomfortable he was sharing the backstory because he knew he was going to be judged.
Yeah, I mean, at the Council of Elrond, Boromir's, we got to use the ring, it's a weapon, and Aragorn's like, no, we can't use it, we can't wield it, like very calmly, and he's like, oh, what does a mere ranger know? And that's when Legolas is like, he's no mere ranger, he's Aragorn, he's the king of Gondor, he should be the king of Gondor. And Aragorn's like, oh, sit down, like he doesn't want that attention, he has no desire to rule, he has no desire to have that power, he wants it just to be forgotten.
Yeah, and I love how Aragorn is also such a layered character. I think in everything we kind of find ourselves, right? But I did see some stuff in Aragorn that reminded me of myself. Like when he is camping out with the guys, he kills a deer and they have it for dinner, but then at night he's singing an elven song or an elvish song. Like
it's a love story.
Yeah, and the one that you referred to earlier, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so we see that like men can just be so much, and I think we don't give them the leeway, or we're not raised to give them that leeway. Like, in my own experience with my masculinity, Ty, I started, I started studying martial arts at 12 years old, and I was active with that probably until I was 25, 26. Yeah. And a lot of what I learned through that was that you have to be humble. That was one of the main rules of our discipline, was being humble. And the whole symbol of putting your open hand over your fist when you bow was, you know how to fight, but you hide it. You don't do it unless you absolutely have to. And that really gave me a lot of confidence that I don't think I ever actually got into any fights in my life. Like, no like real big scuffles, because I didn't have to. Like, I didn't have anything to prove. I knew who I was, and we see that with Aragorn. And especially at the end when Frodo's like, oh, are you going to protect me from yourself? You're trying to take my ring, buddy, blah, blah, blah. And that's exactly what Frodo says, by the way. And Aragorn, closes Frodo's hand, and he's like, all right, go. He lets him take the ring, and he realizes that, Frodo has his own journey to go on. And then shortly after, he's murking orcs left and right. Like, he's such a soft-spoken dude who sings all the time. Doesn't sing all the time, but, he's singing, stories and everything. And then he's decapitating dudes the next second after. Like, you can get you a man who can do both.
Yeah, I mean, he's a warrior. He's a leader. He's someone that Gandalf trusts. And it's like he's looked down upon by other men. Like, they don't respect him because he grew up around elves. He's a little more. I think that's also part of why he's a little bit more soft spoken. That was his inspiration, was spending time with them. He's a romantic at heart. He's in love with an elf woman. It's not something that you typically will see. That it's crossbreeding, right? Like, the elves don't want to breed with humans. They have totally different lifespans and things like that. And I think all of these experiences make him a better man, a more honest man to, who he wants to be, than trying to, be someone he's not.
Yeah, I mean, he loves a woman who basically her culture looks upon him like he's less. And I think it goes back to, I think, Ty, you mentioned your lady, and I think it just shows that love, and sometimes a woman can kind of heal your heart in ways that you can't do it yourself. And I think that love story just shows a lot about what molded his personality.
Definitely. I agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think because we're more likely to learn from somebody who we're that close to than like an acquaintance. If an acquaintance calls you out on something, you're like, all right, well, fuck you. I don't have to listen to you. But like, if it's, somebody who you love and you're planning on spending your life with them and stuff, like, it may behoove you to try and learn a little bit more about where they're coming from. Can I share a problematic moment I had recently?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm not proud of it, but it kind of goes back to being called out and everything. We've been going to my fiance's family every Sunday for dinner and just to hang out and play card games and stuff. It's a small knit group. It's just her family and us. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned it before on the podcast, but for the most part, they are very right-leaning. They're flying that Blue Lives Matter flag out front their house all the time without knowing what it means. And I pretty much just try and stay under the radar and not say anything, because I don't know how to talk about this without being confrontational at this point. And so I pretty much talk about anything else to not bring that up. And so I talked about an acquaintance who Dee and I know, a gentleman who has very fluid movements, maybe a slight lisp. And despite the fact that he's married to a woman, I'm like, oh, he's probably gay. And I don't even necessarily believe that. I just thought it'd be something to talk about, and I just brought it up. And, I'm not proud of it, but I feel like I should talk about it. And so while we were talking about it, my fiance's sister speaks up and she says, you guys hate stereotypes all the time, and yet you're talking about this. And I'm like, yes. Like, I agreed with her. I'm like, yep, absolutely. And the family didn't get it. They were like, oh, what's wrong with what they're doing? And I'm like, she's saying that we're being hypocritical. because we often talk about how stereotypes are bad, and yet we're saying that because this man moves a certain way or speaks a certain way that he's gay. And at the while I brought it out there and said like, oh yeah, this is what we're doing, I'm in the wrong here, I still got angry for being called out. I didn't express that anger, but inside I was angry. And I felt guilty about saying what I said in the first place, and then I felt guilty about being angry too, because we just talked about don't be angry when you're called out on something, try and learn from it. And I'm glad that, that she called me out on it, and I was like, wow, like I was the asshole there. And once again, I do consider myself an ally. I know several people all across the LGBTQIA plus spectrum in my life, and yet I'm the person who was saying that. Like, I don't know, I just felt like I wanted to throw it out there. Yeah. And that was that. Like, everybody can still have their moments. We just got to learn from them. And I'm glad that I was called out.
Yeah, I think we got to admit when we're wrong and take that time to, like you said, to learn from it and figure out, why it's problematic and how we can avoid doing that again in the future.
I think the fact that you said that you were angry for saying that, but you were angry as well for feeling guilty about it. But I think the fact that you allowed yourself to evaluate both feelings. I mean, it's hard to just learn something on the spot. I mean, growth isn't something that just is immediate. So I think at the same token, you have to be patient with yourself that at that moment you were able to acknowledge your anger, you were able to think it over, and now you can be on a podcast talking about it openly. I think sometimes growth takes patience. You can't expect yourself at that moment to catch yourself and to fix it right away. That to me is a very masculine, macho thing of, I can't understand it, but I need to fix it this minute, right now.
Yeah, and what's ironic is that I've been that guy too. Like, I've done drag shows, I've cross-dressed, I've I took dance class all 4 years of high school and was made fun of for it. I've talked about how attractive other men look. And I remember, like, my father was very upset with me once. I texted him. I was talking about Jay Garrick on The Flash. This dude, fucking hunk, the guy who played him. And I mentioned that. I was like, oh, he's a hunk. And he was like, you shouldn't be talking about another man like that, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, your concern over my being gay or straight, which by this point he knows I'm heterosexual. I've had multiple girlfriends. I was super slutty in college, probably too much to try and prove something, I guess. But like, at this point, you know who I am. Like, why are you telling me I shouldn't say that a man is attractive? Like, I'm fine with who I am. I'm fine with saying that. You know what I mean? But I think I told him, I said, if my value to you is based around me being able to have sex with a woman, that's kind of messed up. Because if it's your daughter, the last thing you want to think about is your daughter having sex, right? So why is it that way with your son? Why with any of your kids are you like, oh, like, I wonder what their sex life is like? Like, obviously, you should explore sexual education and have a healthy discussion around it in your household, but still, like, I don't know. I just thought that was weird. And like, also, like, I've even talked about it with my fiance. Like, I don't think I'm bi, but I definitely have like bi-curious tendencies sometimes. Like, more so like in my, my porn searches sometimes, like I'll be like, oh, let's see what these guys are up to, or something like that. And I'll look up one of those scenes that a threesome minus the woman, and it's just two dudes. But like, and I'm absolutely fine with that. Like, I know who I am. I have no need to prove myself to anybody or to prove my manhood to anybody. My manhood has been forged in the way that I grew up. I may not have known how to build a fire up until a couple of years ago, but I learned. Does that make me any less of a man? I personally don't think so. But for me to live the life that I've lived, I would. For example, I've always told my fiance, I'm like, I think I would look really good in purple lipstick. Like, if I just wore it. Ty, you remember a few years ago, just because I thought they were comfortable, I went and got some skirts and I wore them around the house.
Yeah.
Because they were comfortable, and very, very breezy. But for me to do all those things and then turn around and be like, oh, a guy has a lisp and he throws his hands around a lot, he must be gay. That was kind of messed up. But no, but thank you for saying what you did, Frankie. And actually, let me just follow up on that. When I was super young, I used to have one of those rat tails growing in. And my father was like, oh, you have a ponytail? And I was like, no, I don't. And he was like, oh, well, like girls have long hair. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm 5, 6 years old. I don't control my hair at that point. I don't even dress myself. Like, everything is controlled by my parents at this point. I was living with my mom, though. And he made me cut it off. And not only did he make me, but he manipulated me into cutting off the rat's tail, which is a little worse. He was like, oh, well, all the bad guys in movies, they're the ones with ponytails and stuff like that. Do you want to be a bad guy? And, I'm a huge superhero fanatic. I was like, I don't want to be a bad guy. I want to be one of the heroes. So, yeah, like, he cut it off, not even with scissors. He took a kitchen knife to it, cut the rat tail off, and then he's like, there you go. And he threw it on the table, and I remember, like, strangling the rat's tail and throwing it in the garbage because it wasn't just him having a problem with it. Now he passed that on to me, and I had a problem with it. That being said, there's not a single dude in this movie with short hair, is there?
Not really.
They all have long hair, and that's what made me think about that. I was like, holy crap, like all these dudes, and once again, they don't question who they are as men. They're soldiers, they're warriors, they're whatever. They all have long hair. It's not a problem. Why do we care?
Yeah, I mean, I think the quarantine has given me a new understanding on letting your hair grow and the facial hair grow. So when I see the movie, I actually didn't think about it, but because I was just like, if you saw myself like 4 weeks ago before I cut my hair, I was looking very Lord of the Ring-ish. But what I think about with you when telling your story about your father and cutting off the rat tail, I think about maybe when you spoke about the lisp and the hand movement. Sometimes you're taught, subconsciously you're taught these things. Who knows if your father made a reference when you were younger to someone making that movement, and it's kind of robotic. It goes into your deep consciousness, and you're not aware of it, and then sometimes you see something and you just react and you don't think, and when you react, you caught yourself like, why am I saying this? Why am I thinking like this? This doesn't embody who I really am. But I think we do have tendencies to have things that have been embedded in our brains and that we were taught, and we're not even aware of it until we say it out loud, and we say, shit, I've heard this voice before. I've heard these words before. This is not who I am. But, you say it, you own it, and then you change it.
Can we talk about Bilbo's mercy real quick? Because I thought that was interesting. How, like, in a world of high fantasy and, highly influenced by medieval culture, it's easy for someone to swing a sword and chop off a head. And Gandalf is talking to Frodo, and he references Bilbo's whole interaction with Gollum, and he says, like, oh, some people, deserve to die and they live. Some people deserve to live and they die. Like, Bilbo's mercy toward Gollum is going to, decide everything, basically. I don't think he says that, but as we know by watching all the movies, that it does decide it, that Gollum's role is much larger than just being killed off by Bilbo, however many years ago they met.
Yeah, I mean, Gandalf does say Gollum has a role to play. And I think Frodo remembers these words, and when Gollum is at his mercy, he chooses to befriend him. And for a time, I mean, Gollum actually does change, He really does believe Frodo's his friend, and they have this mutual bond over the ring, and they're able to, work together towards a common goal for a short time. So yeah, I mean, that mercy winds up being pivotal in destroying the ring in the end.
I also want to talk about after Gandalf's quote-unquote death in the Fellowship of the Ring, how everybody reacted afterwards. Like, some people were angry, but the majority of them were crying, and like, Merry and Pippin are like, they're, rubbing each other and like, oh, are you okay? And they're crying and everything. And, unfortunately that grieving is short-lived because they have to keep moving. But it reminded me of my own experience when I lost my mom last year and she died. And I remember my father texted me, and, Frankie, you and I were talking off mic before about how much of a piece of shit he was during the whole, my mom dying experience. Tickets on sale for $75 starting next week when Phase 4 happens. But but he texted me and he was like, "Oh, you have to be strong." And by that point, it didn't upset me, but I felt bad for him because I'm like, oh no, the time for being strong is over. I was strong for her when she was alive. Now that she's gone, I'm going to fucking cry my eyes out every day. I'm going to eat whatever I want. I'm going to stay indoors for hours at a time. I'm going to let the depression take me. I'm going to work through my emotions. I'm going to come out on the other side. And, while it's not, the grieving process isn't actually that simple or quick, you still grieve. I grieve to this day. But it is interesting, like this whole idea of like being strong means suppressing your emotions, doesn't it? Or does it mean having these emotions and continuing to live in spite of them?
Well, that's a lot. I just think everyone's definition of is strong is just, it's so different because of how we were raised, that I think the fact that you're so secure in your emotions can maybe even, I don't know anything about your father's character. Let me preface by saying that, other than what you told me, and I'm going to take your word.
You know a little now.
I'm going to take your word on it because he's your father, and I'm going to roll with you. But who knows, who allowed him to feel secure enough? He just might not be as strong as you. I think that just shows that you're at a higher level than he is, and we can't expect. When I went back to my, we have to be patient with growth. It doesn't just work to our preference. Like, it doesn't just go with what we want. We really do have to be patient with growth. I look back with my father. I do not have a relationship with him since I was about 15. So the father-son relationship, to me, it's gone. Like, being a father, I don't need him to be my father anymore. I am a father. But then I still, in the back of my mind, because I'm at a place of peace and healing, I want the best for him. I want him to reach, growth. And in my head, I'm like, be patient with him as a man, that he'll reach that place, that he'll become a better person. Even if I don't need that attachment from him, I still want the best for him. So it could just be you're at a higher place than your father is, even though you're younger. And it just, the way we're taught as men, if he wasn't taught, if he didn't have that courage to break the trend as you did, that you can understand how you feel. The fact that you even know that I have to go through these motions, this is my step 1, step 2, step 3, and this is what I need to do. Some men aren't even aware of that. They don't even know what step 1 is, how to even go about it. I think we have to put away age when we talk about masculinity, because some of the older generations act more juvenile than we do. So I think we have to throw that out. I think the way you mature as a man has nothing to do about age, and I think we can be at a higher level than our fathers and our grandfathers, and they can still be at a place of growth. And that's why I'm saying we have to be patient, but being patient doesn't mean we have to have them in our lives. We can want them to reach that growth and be separate.
Well, yeah, because, a lot of times these people's presences in our lives just continue to make it more difficult. No, but that's a good point. I appreciate you saying that. I think another big thing is just, like Aragorn, he wasn't raised by his own family. He was raised by others. I was also raised by others. And the most influential people in my life, for the most part, have been women. My martial arts instructor, she was a woman. One of my surrogate moms who I still talk to this day and, learned a lot about responsibility from is a woman. Ty, your mom who helped raise me, is a woman. Yeah. And, she's just one of the toughest motherfuckers I've ever known. And, like my fiance's mother is a woman, and she has a lot of very admirable qualities and is all about charity and everything like that. And I've learned that from her. And, even my ex-girlfriend's mother also had a huge part in my life. Like, at this point, I've been helped out so much by women that I owe it to myself and to women in general to continue to give back and help and be an ally as much as possible. I think that's part of where my emotional intelligence comes from. And even from my own mom, like, bless her soul, she was very traditional, in the way she was raised. And, she wouldn't like me doing anything that was near that would be considered feminine. I asked her once, I said, what, I was joking around saying that I was going out with my roommate in college, but I was like, no, I'm joking, but what if I was gay? How would you feel? And she was like, I said, would you still love me? And she said, yeah, we love you, but you wouldn't get any money from us anymore.
Oh my God.
Because I guess she'd be funding my gay operations, my multi-million-dollar corporation.
You only sponsored if you're straight.
Exactly. I like how you mentioned breaking the cycle too, because I think, Ty, you mentioned before about where your father came from, and even though your grandfather, who was pretty affectionate and good with you, which partially could have come from because he saw where he fucked up with his own kid, he wants to make it up with his grandkids. But, I know that my father, he didn't have his father in his life. I come from a long line of man sluts, and my grandfather is no exception. He had 4 different families with 4 different women. I believe that my father and uncles and aunts were all from the second family, but my father never grew up with a father. He grew up with an abusive grandmother who would, beat him and, tried to kill him a couple of times when he was growing up. And so whatever he did as far as parenting goes, it was a lot better than that. His best still wasn't great, though. His best wasn't good enough, but he did his best, and that's kind of what we do. Frankie, you're a father. You're the only father out of 3 of us, and I'm sure you can attest to. We want to raise our kids better than we were raised.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I feel like that's instinctual. I really believe that everyone goes about parenting wanting to be better than their parents. Not everyone can achieve it. Who knows what my kids are going to say about me in hindsight when they grow up. I'm hoping
we all mess up,
Yeah, I'm hoping it will be positive. Going back just to, when I'm speaking about my father, I'm going to also just explain my father. Even though I don't have a relationship with him, I don't think of my father as a bad man. I think of my father as his idea of manhood and masculinity and what he wanted me to become. The fact that I couldn't become that caused a conflict because that wasn't the man that I wanted to become. It caused conflict. And I don't really want to say that makes him a bad man. It just wasn't the man I wanted to be with. And I grew up in a very similar situation as you. My mother, my abuela, my aunt from my father's side I was very close to. My father's brother is gay, and he's always been a father figure to me since I was younger. So it always caused a little confusion for myself growing up as well, because I played on the baseball team. I played football. I also played chess. I also sang 4 years of concert choir. I was also a poet and a writer. So some of the things I would think about would come from the woman element of my upbringing. So I would think about, how is this going to make a woman feel in my decisions? Because I had such a respect for the women in my life, I wouldn't think about the man element. I was thinking about how my actions affected women. So that sometimes made me think about things so deep, it would make me wonder, like, I love women, but is this straight? And I had such a close relationship with my uncle that, we used to watch. I was watching independent movies in Union Square that none of my friends would watch. I was watching movies with openly homosexual lead characters and totally into it. We would have these conversations, and I would be free to be like, oh yeah, he's a great looking guy, and I never thought about it. It never crossed my mind. It never crossed my mind. But that was my upbringing. Like, my father was the mold of macho masculinity, good looking, had it all. And then my uncle was this homosexual man that I looked up to, who was teaching me values that my father couldn't. And it wasn't so much that my father was a bad man. It was just, you get to a certain age that you decide the man you want to be. And it sometimes doesn't coincide with what the man you look up to is teaching you.
And we are going to leave it right there for now, because as we see with Lord of the Rings, any great story has to be told in parts. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in. Please stay tuned for part 2 next week. Thanks so much to Frankie Soto for guest starring on this episode. Remember, you can find him at frankiesotopoetry.com. You can find him on Instagram at frankiesotopoetry. You can find him on Twitter at frankiesotopoet. He is the 2016 and 2019 Multicultural Poet of the Year, and you can vote for him this year for the 2020 National Spoken Word Awards. Link is in the show notes. Find him at item 19 under Best Multicultural Artist. You can listen to us and rate and review us and subscribe on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the iHeartRadio app. Find us on Twitter at PolitiPopPod. Find us on Instagram at PolitiPopPodcast. Find us via email at politipopcast@gmail.com. And as always, you can find our show notes and sources at politipopcast.wordpress.com. On today's episode, we're going to be writing out on What Makes a Good Man by The Heavy. Until next time, no matter what you're listening to, no matter what you're watching, no matter what you're reading, Black Lives Matter, and remember to read between the lines. Yeah, it's really beautiful, too, I lost my spot. I was going to stop recording. Yeah, I feel like, that happens a lot. I'm going to cut that part out. Just what I said, that happens a lot, because I didn't have anywhere to go.
Actually, I can back that up a little bit more, though, about Gandalf, if you want, real quick.
Please do, yes.